Right, let's get into this discussion now. So, renowned accountant and Sifiso Learning Group co-founder, Dr. Sizwe Nxasana, delivered a public lecture at UNISA. The lecture evaluated the progress made in the accounting profession and in education in 30 years of democracy in South Africa. His lecture explored possible intervention strategies that could be implemented to address the shortage of accounting skills and also to support African graduates. Dr. Nxasana joins us now to talk about all things accounting, education and certainly innovation. Dr. Nxasana, good morning to you and thank you so much for giving us your time.
Good morning.
Yeah, this is such an important lecture, right? The theme, reflecting on the democratization of accounting in higher education. As soon as I saw the theme, I thought, you know what, it might actually be helpful for our viewers to explain how you interpret the theme, right? What you describe as the democratization of accounting. What does the democratization of the field mean?
Well, this means opportunities, especially for those people who've been excluded, who essentially are all the African people, to have access to different professions, not just the accounting profession, and secondly, to succeed once they've entered that profession, and thirdly, to have meaningful participation in the economy after they qualify. Because when you look at all professions, obviously not just the accounting profession, there are still major issues that face Africans, particularly women Africans, in entering these professions and in progressing and finding meaningful economic participation and opportunities when they complete.
Hard to believe that we're still talking about shortages and needing to create access for people to, I suppose, upskill themselves where the accounting profession is concerned, 30 years into democracy. How badly have we failed, Dr. Nxasana? I think perhaps what I'm asking you is paint a picture of when we look at even the workforce in the accounting space, right? How much of that has been, I suppose, given to those that needed to climb up the ranks to get those opportunities?
Yeah, so when you look at it, yes, of course, we've made progress. And I can talk, for instance, particularly about the chartered accountancy profession.
Right.
That over the last 30 years, we've seen significant improvement. You know, when some of us qualified, I was the sixth African to qualify as a chartered accountant. We're now seeing larger numbers of people who qualify every year. But the problem still remains, especially when you look at the differential between Africans and white counterparts. There's somewhere in the region of about 30 percentage points difference in the pass rates of Africans when you compare to white people, as an example. So if white people are passing at the rate of, say, 85%, Africans are passing at the rate of about 50 to 55%, which obviously means there's a problem. But when you analyze the root cause of that problem, it goes back to the schooling system, issues such as language. The mother tongue-based education is one of the biggest impediments because we still talk about our children not reading for meaning, but when you look at the root cause of why that is so, in many cases, it is because our children have to be taught in English from grade 4 by teachers who are not first language English speakers, as an example, which then means that the transmission of knowledge, skills, and competences is severely impacted. The second issue is mathematics. There's a math issue in the country and the challenge that we need to face, because what we've seen over the last 30 years is that, for instance, in the class of 2023, grade 12s, we only have about just over 36 or 35% of learners are doing core mathematics, as opposed to the other balance, which is 64% that are doing maths literacy. And the problem with that is that with maths literacy, you cannot enter a lot of the science, even, for instance, the vocational courses at TVET colleges, you cannot, even get in there. But what's also even more acute is when you look at those learners who get the minimum pass rate, which is typically 60%, we only have 6% of the learners out of about 700,000 that get the marks that are enough to get into the professions such as accounting, medicine, engineering, actuarial science, and even the trades at TVET colleges. So those two, the issue of mother tongue education as well as mathematics, are issues that we have to address as a country if we are going to achieve the democratization of not just the accounting profession, but of all the professions.
Sure, that's quite a picture that you've painted there, Dr. Nxasana. You've essentially said that only 6% are making the marks that can get them into accounting and some of those big professions. That's a shocking number. And if you allow me to switch gears here a little bit, you've brought about the issue of language. And I remember that you were really at the helm of NSFAS when the country was watching as students were protesting, asking for free education. One of the calls that these students were making was the decolonization of higher learning. And I wonder if we've taken that conversation further enough, right? When you talk about the bottlenecks that the language issue is causing us in our learners, particularly as they enter higher learning, when we talk about decolonizing, are we having the wrong discussion?
No, that is a very important discussion. And that discussion has led to, at the moment, there's a pilot which has been implemented by the Department of Basic Education, which is mother tongue bilingual based education. In other words, recognizing the important role that indigenous languages play in the transmission of knowledge as academic, languages. So that process has started. It needs to be resourced. It is under-resourced at the moment. But also there are a lot of other things that need to be done. Like, for instance, the standardization of terminology, especially for things like mathematics and science and so on. And we can learn a lot from how Afrikaans or the Afrikaners did this, because you borrow from other languages to create a language that is accessible to your learners. At the moment, as I said earlier, when our learners transition from grade 3 to grade 4, the language of learning and teaching for the majority, about 85% of our learners, is now English, taught by teachers who are not first language English speakers themselves. So a lot gets lost in that process of learning and teaching.
Yeah, I must tell you, I almost want to go back to some of my own schooling days and share with you the kind of conversations that young people in my schooling days anyway were having around accounting. And there was this, I suppose, this belief that, if you're going to study accounting, you're about the money, that's what you're chasing. It's about the money. And I wonder if, maybe what we need to be doing is having a bigger discussion around the role of accounting in our society, that it really isn't just, the notes and the coins, right? And that's something that you've done quite well in your lecture. The role of accounting in a society like ours, like our country.
Well, when you think about it, accounting, just like, mathematics as an example, plays a really important role in different spheres of life. Understanding, for instance, how economies work, understanding issues such as cybersecurity, artificial intelligence. Accountants these days are not just about counting money. They play a very important role in providing strategic direction to governments, to corporations, to businesses, and so on. So as accountants, you can't just be limited in terms of how you are trained to the debits and credits of accounting. You need to understand the broader aspects of how life generally works, including government and business.
We've got this brand new government now, and of course a cabinet that one hopes that by now has, I suppose, gotten the ropes and is going to hit the ground running. But I wonder what your message to the new basic education minister, for instance, would be, right? Sizwe Nxasana, what it is that she needs to get right so that we're creating the skills that are necessary moving forward.
Yeah, well, I'm in a very fortunate position as a co-founder of the National Education Collaboration Trust that we work very closely with the Department of Basic Education in many different areas. I talked about the issue of mathematics, mother tongue-based bilingual education as an example, review of the curriculum, the strengthening of the curriculum, the CAPS curriculum that is, and just addressing some of the fundamental issues that we have in the country, such as, for instance, how our teachers are trained. And that aspect does not sit with the Department of Basic Education, it sits with the Department of Higher Education and Training, because that's where universities are controlled. And there's a major disconnect between how teachers in this country are trained, or students are trained to become teachers, versus what is required in the Department of Basic Education.
Yeah, I believe that you've, as a result of that, you've done the work to become a teacher yourself so that you're able to sew those gaps together.
Yes, I'm a qualified teacher now, and I'm actually doing a PhD in education, which is about how do we take teachers who are trained in a traditional way, which is what a lot of the universities in South Africa do, to a new way of teaching young people, because it's not just about knowledge, which is what our country's been focusing on for the last 30 years, but it's also about the skills and competencies. In other words, can you think critically? Can you solve problems? Can you work with others? Can you innovate? And all of those things are important as skills that teachers must have if they are going to impart those skills to young learners.
You know, sadly, there are so many inequalities in our country, and you can look at them in so many different areas. For instance, I think about inequality where internet connectivity is an issue, and it's one of the issues that you've touched on in your lecture as well. What do we do about that to give people access to information, hopefully education, but for that you need the infrastructure to do that?
Yeah, so, you know, I was a CEO of Telkom for about 9 years, and I left Telkom in 2005 to become the CEO of a bank. And even those years, I mean, it's now almost 20 years ago, we're talking about connecting public spaces, and the discussion about SA Connect, you know, started way back then. It has not happened yet, and which is a real pity, because we deny a lot of young people. We know we live in a country which has one of the highest costs of data and access to data, as an example. So this SA Connect is particularly important. It sits in the Department of Communications and Digital Technologies, obviously working with the regulator, ICASA particularly. But it's an issue that's urgent, has to be addressed, because to the extent that we continue to deny access to internet connectivity to the majority of our people, means that they will never really meaningfully participate, for instance, in artificial intelligence, in developing programs that are digitally based, as an example, and solutions that could create many work opportunities or economic opportunities for a lot of our young people.
Yeah.
So SA Connect is, in my view, extremely urgent. We need all the 25,000 schools in the country connected to the internet with affordable, in fact, even free internet access for that matter. And we've got to do this as a matter of urgency.
I don't think anyone can argue with that at all, Dr. Nxasana. Just before I let you go, you obviously then put forward ideas on what needs to happen, who needs to be working together, and you make the example, of course, of the Government of National Unity as they need to take that approach, and it being a multi-sectoral approach to democratize accounting in South Africa. Explain that for us.
Yeah, so, you know, as I was indicating earlier, democratization is about not just providing access. You know, almost 100% of our young people have access to schools these days. But the issue is, what kind of education do they have? And where are the gaps in terms of providing quality education? And then how do we set young people up for success? Because if you are having a 6% pass rate in mathematics, an example, clearly there's a crisis. We can't have that situation and think that it is an acceptable kind of outcome. And then and it's also about how do we make sure that we're producing young people that are able to confront the fast-changing world of work, because creating entrepreneurs, as an example, is something that we have to focus on, and then creating an ecosystem for young people to be able to start businesses and become employers. This is something that we do at Future Nation Schools. The way that we teach, we use project-based learning as an example, as an approach to learning and teaching, because when young people finish, they must already have certain certifications, as an example, to enable them not only to just study to go to university, to study to be able to understand that they could potentially become employers.
Yeah, really lots to think about. But one of the things that you've brought forward as well is the idea of it not just being a government responsibility, right? That it is a civil society responsibility. And I want to talk a little bit about that. Is there an element here that's necessary from a community level?
So if you look at, why the National Education Collaboration Trust, which I'm a co-founder of, started, we have all the 5 teacher unions that are involved. We have civil society. We have organized business through Business Leadership South Africa, as an example. And we've been able to mobilize resources from all those key social partners with government to address the fundamental issues that face this country in the area of education. But obviously we need a lot more of that, and I'm hopeful with the Government of National Unity that bringing even other political parties into this discussion and working collaboratively together to solve these fundamental problems in the country will get us into a space where we start to make a major difference in all these barriers and issues and challenges that we face as a country.
Yeah, and I think